I'm David Hershey. I am on the Applied AI team at Anthropic, and I like a latte in the morning.
Welcome back to the MLOps Community Podcast. I'm your host, Demetrios, and today I'm talking to an old friend, David. He's been working at Anthropic, and it is a blast every time I catch up with him because I learn new stuff. I chat with him, and he opens my mind a little bit. Recently, he's gotten quite famous because of the Anthropic model that has come out and is playing Pokemon. That is cool. He made that. And we talk all about it. Let's get into this conversation with Senor David. I had to put on my nice outfit because I knew that I was going to be talking to someone who is famous.
I don't know about that, but I appreciate it, Deep.
Dude, you created the Pokemon. Claude Plays Pokémon, and I didn't even know it. You were showing me that, and I was like, yeah, this is great. I thought it was just Anthropic that did that. I didn't realize that was your thing.
Yeah, that is my baby, my side project for a while. It has an interesting story of how it came to be a little bit because it wasn't always like this. It got put out into the world this weekend for a long time. It was just sort of like my little fun side hustle, um, but yeah, that is my baby. Somehow people are watching it. Like it's been stuck in one spot for 2 days, and there's 1,500 people still watching it. So I'm sort of like amazed that people care.
Are still doing it. That is incredible. Tell me about how did you even get that idea? How did you go about executing on it?
Yeah, no doubt. So honestly, so it started like the first time I tried this was in like June last year. There's basically like two things that were true. I work with customers at Anthropic. I was working with a bunch of customers. We're all working on agents, and like I wanted some place for me to be able to like build out agents to some extent, right? Like some of our more successful customers were building really cool agents, and it's just like I needed some playground for myself to build it on. And so it's like, okay, I'm excited to try to build with agents. How do I want to do it? And it's like, well, I should probably do the thing that's going to be like the literal most fun. Like if I'm going to really get into it, like I'm going to have some fun along the way. And someone else at Anthropic actually before me had tried hooking up Quad to Pokemon, like an initial like little test. And so I was just like, let's do it. So I back in June last year, I kind of like dove in and built out a little bit of like a handful of different like agent frameworks to try to play Pokemon. And then since then, it's just like kind of like every time we've released new models, I've been slowly iterating and improving and sort of like working on it,
Nice.
seeing progress
Cooking
come
it
by,
up.
that kind of thing. So, but yeah, it just started out of like purely like, I want to do this thing and I'm going to like make sure I have a great time along the way. Which on a side note, I then became like deeply obsessed. If you ask my wife, she's probably like kind of upset at me at how obsessed I am with this thing.
And you realized that it was good enough to release to the world now because why?
Yeah. Uh, okay, so we tried this on Sonnet 3.5 when it came out in June,
Yeah.
and it like you could see it do some stuff. Like it got out of the house, like it meandered around, but like it struggled, right? We tried it with Sonnet 3.6 unofficially, and Sonnet 3.5 new in October. Um, and it got a little bit further, like it got a starter Pokemon, it got out, like it did some stuff, right? And I actually thought about releasing it then. And like the thing that kind of was happening in the middle was like I would post these updates to our Slack about this. Like I have a Slack channel at Anthropic about this. And
All about Pokemon? All about
yeah,
Claude
yeah,
playing
Claude
Pokemon?
Plays Pokemon is the internal one too. Um, People were following along, right? Like, so I joked that was like Claude's social media manager while I played Pokemon kind of for a while. Like I would just like pull out GIFs and clips of it, like doing stuff, and people would get kind of hyped. And it was like fun enough even back when or with the last model that like it was like, oh, should we put this out? Like it's kind of fun. But it's like it was pretty bad. Like it didn't get very far. It would have been like a 12-hour experiment. There really would have been much to it. Um and so then with this model, like it just like kind of reached the breakthrough where like you could see it kind of meaningfully do stuff and make progress. And it's still like to be clear in its current state, like there's stuff it's good at, there's stuff it's bad at, but it's like enough that like it does move through the game slowly. uh, and there's also like this like give and take of it like does something really stupid for a while, and you're like, no, Claude, why? And then it like solves it, and it's very like it's just like kind of it's got that tension that's good in content a little bit. Um, and so it became like, and I think like people internally following this along were just like having a really good time. By the time with Claude was like beating gym leaders and stuff, people are like freaking out, having a good
We
time.
gotta release this. Oh, yeah,
A
that
little
makes
bit of
sense.
that. The release actually came late, but then the other side, like honestly, is um like we put it out in our research blog, like the chart of the different models making different amounts of progress. And there's like literally just some amount of like, it's an interesting way to see how models handle these like long horizon decisioning things. All of these evals that people are used to, like MMLU and GPQA, like there's all these evals that exist out there. And most of them are like, here's a prompt and I get a response, and like, does it get it right or not? And there's like fleetingly few that are like actually testing the model's ability to like take in new information, try another thing, make progress. And that's because it's like pretty hard to actually like measure those things. Like doing 10 hours of work, it's like pretty hard to measure like how good was that 10 hours of work, when a model does it. But Pokemon, it's like, I don't know, you beat a gym leader. Like that's a thing that happens after 10 hours, right? And so it actually like kind of to some extent, even internally for us, became a measuring stick of like how well can this model like stay coherent over hours and hours and hours and prompts and prompts and prompts of like taking new information, trying to learn, update, do stuff. It became interesting enough for us to like understand what the models were good and bad at still, that it was like also just like a good thing to put out there to show people like, what can
Wow,
this do?
yeah.
Like, why does this matter? And I know Pokemon's kind of like a goofy way to do that to some extent. I think like it resonates with some people that like, oh, these models like aren't just like a chat thing I type in a prompt, but they can kind of like go do stuff sometimes. Even if it's like not that good, like comparatively, it's better than it has been.
Do you feel like you're going to now start simulating a whole bunch of these to get some data and then maybe try and make it better for the next one?
I think like part of what's fun about this is that like it's not trained on Pokemon. Like part of the fun thing is like it's exploring this thing for the first time and getting a feel for that. And so I think we're gonna stay in the version of this where it's like just sort of like a good way to see how it experiences these new environments that it's never really been trained to do.
Well, take me through the internals. What does it actually look like? You mentioned you created an agent framework for
Yeah,
it. You didn't want to grab anything off the shelf, or
yeah.
you like what's
I'm a learn by do kind of guy. Sometimes you like don't get to the depth of like how does this thing work and why does it work that you wanted to get to. So that was where it came from. I learned this like my favorite way to learn this. This is a complete tangent, but I took Carpathy's like computer vision class in grad school,
uh-huh.
and he has this like right gradient descent from scratch exercise, like homework exercise he did, where it's like, like TensorFlow had just come out at the time. You could do that, but it's like, no, you're gonna write it. You're gonna figure out how to like implement a machine learning framework yourself. And that's like the way that I understand machine learning now is like 30% because of that one assignment.
The value, the time to value that you got, you still remember that one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's
Uh,
incredible.
yeah. Part of what's so fun about like doing this and building in this way with these models is like you just like learn a lot about them when you stare at them write a million tokens. Like I've seen Claude write, I don't even want to know how many words about Pokemon, but like you learn a lot about like how it thinks by just like reading it a lot, like getting into the weeds, seeing how it reacts to different prompts and stuff like that. That's like the core of why I decided to kind of go my own way. I tried a few like the published papers, like I tried Voyager back when that was a thing, and a few other things, but like at the end of the day, I just kind of like wanted to hook something up myself.
And what does it actually do? Like, what is the way that it takes in world information and then like acts on that?
Yeah, it's actually like pretty simple. Over time, I've like actually stripped out a lot of complexity from it. So
Nice.
I'll go over it quickly, but it's like it's not the craziest thing in the world. Um, has like a quick prompt to tell it like it's playing Pokemon, and I give it access to 3 tools essentially. Um, it has like the ability to use like press buttons. It can press like
Yep.
A, B, start, select, up, down, left, right. Like press buttons. Um, it has this like concept of a knowledge base that's actually like stuck in its prompt, but it's just like bits of information that it stores to keep track of things over long periods of time. So it's like Electric is super effective against water, the thing it could like decide to write there potentially, but it like fully controls that. So it can like add sections to it, edit sections, that kind of thing. And then I have, so Claude's like still not that good at like actually seeing the screen. So the last tool I have is what I call Navigator. And that lets it like point to a place it wants to go on the screen. And like the model like will just like automatically move it there if it's like within reach of like the current screen. It doesn't have like a great understanding still of like the difference in its position between like where it is and where it wants to go. So like if you just like let it say where it wants to go, it does a little better. It's the only like simplification we really make for it. And then like how it actually sees the world is when it presses a button, it gets a screenshot back like to see where it is after the button press. It also gets like a little dump of some stuff that it, like reads directly from the game, like its current location and a few other things, but it's like pretty minor. But basically like it presses buttons, it sees what happens afterwards, and then it presses the next button and it goes and goes and goes.
Like, kind of like me with a new program.
Yeah. More or less. It's not that different. It's not that different from how you play it.
But wait, so there was one thing there that is interesting is the prompt that Claude itself has the ability to update things in its own prompt.
Yeah. So the key insight there is like, you're playing Pokemon. Let's see. I'm looking at the stream over here. In like 3 days since it's been up, it's taken 16,884 actions as of this exact moment in time.
Wow.
And so like if you think about that, that like roughly correlates to like 16,000 screenshots, like a whole bunch of stuff that it has seen over that time. And it like that much information doesn't fit into the context window of a language model, right? So you need some way to like be able to condense, like to get rid of old information. And so the knowledge base, I'm literally not sure this is the most optimal way to manage this, but the knowledge base is one way that it can keep track of information over longer periods of time. So what ends up happening is it like takes 30 actions and then it summarizes the conversation, like the things it did for the last 30 actions, and like chunks that down. And then it's sort of like accordions like that, right? So it takes 30 actions, does a summary, takes 30 actions, does a summary, that kind of thing. But trying to keep everything in the summary it hopefully writes kind of bloats. So the knowledge base is a way for it to like kind of track longer horizon things.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, dude, talk to me about some of the stuff that you're doing right now at Anthropic. I know you're leading a team that is engaging on fine tuning,
Yep.
and we mentioned I had the big question of, hey, is fine tuning really all it's cracked up to be? And I say that because we did a roundtable with NVIDIA probably like a month ago. And one thing that was abundantly clear, because we did the whole roundtable on fine tuning, and folks were like, I've seen way more lift for way less effort by just tuning my prompt, not fine tuning the model. Yeah, what are your opinions on it?
I think that's about right for the vast majority of things, honestly. Um, like to some extent, that's the best thing about language models, right? Like I come from the world of machine learning, you and me both. Like, uh, when you have to make a change to a model by like training it and getting new data and stuff like that, it's like that is slow. There's a reason MLOps is such a hard thing, is because like getting that all right is really freaking hard. And comparatively, like prompting is a miracle where you can like iterate on this thing with a, you know, even if you have a big eval suite, it's like a 10-minute iteration cycle, not a 3 week or whatever iteration cycle. And so I think like from my experience, like I frequently encourage anybody who's thinking about fine tuning, like one of the first things I go in and do is like, how far have you really pushed prompting? Like how far have you really gotten with it? And there are people that have like really stretched it to the limit, but there are a lot of people who like maybe because like prompting is like a little weird still, like people haven't quite figured it out, like how to get it right. It can be finicky. It's not easy to like get the best prompt. And I think so some people like get stuck part way and think they're at the top. But until you like really are confident that you've gotten the most out of a prompt, I think it's like almost never a good idea to to even consider fine tuning for most use cases. And there's so much you can do to add knowledge with RAG, with like whatever other way you want to put things in the prompt, like that are way easier than trying to like do fine tuning. That, yeah, for someone whose job is to help people with fine tuning broadly, like I spend a lot more time telling people that they should like steer away from it to start, because I think you got to be like pretty precise. It's really expensive. Like it's just like it's a challenging. I don't mean expensive from like the cost of like even doing it.
It's
It's like
time,
the
right?
cost of people's time
Yeah.
working on it is just really, really hard to justify more often than not.
Yeah.
Obviously, like I have a job, so I don't think that's like that means it's always a bad idea.
You have a
Uh,
job and a team that you lead. So when is it right to do?
yeah, good question. I think there are a handful of use cases and times where fine tuning really makes sense. Um, I work on and see a subset of them, but I'll try to like give you an overview of like my viewpoint on like where it can be a good idea. Um, One that I guess I'll call out first is like a thing that works, but also feels a little bit to me like a trap, which is like the pattern of taking, like trying to train a smaller model to do something that a bigger model can do well, to like save money particularly, is the thing that I've seen occasionally. The reason that I think that is like a bit of a trap is when you look at the last few years of model development, like uh every handful of months, a cheaper, smarter model comes out. And just by like kind of doing nothing with your whole dev team, you can often get that same outcome. Like you can get a cheaper model that, it's like a cheaper, faster model that does the thing that the last model did fine.
Just with a
And
little bit of patience.
with
Yeah.
just patience, right? And I think like, unless it's like such a layup because you already have data and you know exactly how it's going to work, like the process of getting fine tuning right is still pretty challenging. Like building the right data set, making it work well, making it not like degrade the other capabilities of a model. Like these are all pretty challenging things to get right. And you're going to end up sinking a lot of developer time into something that you could just like do nothing and do. So that's one that I think like it does work. Like you can have success. Like you can do the thing. But I'm like, I think people need to be a little bit more like skeptical of should they do it, even if it's possible, for that.
Because that use case right there was one of the folks that was in that roundtable. They said, look, I cut my cost by like 90% because of that very thing that you're talking about. But that's once they get a model that is working, right? So the cost of the model spitting out information is probably 90% cheaper. But
Yeah.
what was the cost of getting that model?
I mean, there's like an easy corollary to that, this within Anthropic, which is we put out Haiku 3.5 4 months ago, right? I think it was November at my time. I lose track of time here, but it was somewhere around there. And it like benchmarks wise is about as good as Opus that we put out in March of last year. So it's like 8 months or something like that between the two. And it's like literally a tenth of the cost. Like so there's your 90% cost savings there, right? So it's like this is like the actual thing that happens. So like maybe you care about that 6 months. Like maybe you get it done in 2 or 3 months,
Yeah.
uh and you saved money for 6 months, and that makes a big difference for you. But like I don't know, the opportunity cost of people who could work on machine learning is pretty high. I think it's it's not clear to me that the trade-off is great for that, is all I would say. Which is, again, it works. Like if that math makes sense to you, I think it makes sense.
Yeah.
Um,
If you're at that scale, then of
yeah,
course, go for it, right? But
yeah, right. Like you
you have to
can, if you
know.
save $5 million for $1 million of work or something like that, then like you made $4 million, I suppose.
Yeah.
The flip side does still exist though, that like you could have done maybe something else that was more valuable than that with your time. Anyway, I'm like, we're getting into the the nuance of this, but I just like uh I personally would approach that with a little bit of skepticism is all.
Yeah. And the
Um
other side is for form, right?
yeah, and so then there's like this other form of like kind of relatively simple fine tuning that I think works, which is just like there's a handful of cases where it's like I needed to follow this output format a little bit better. I needed to like understand this input format of data I have. So like maybe I've got some specific kind of document that I want the model to like understand a little bit better and be able to work with a little bit better. And there are just like a bunch of like little examples of like my data looks like this. This data is like a little different than what the model's ever seen before. It's
Yeah.
not that hard to like reason about, but like getting the model to like actually get it uh, might be really powerful. And I've seen like other things like, you know, classifiers with language models. Like language models have this like pretty good understanding of text in general, and like you can get them to do like simple classification tasks that work really well. There's a handful of stuff like that that's like kind of in the this is an easy task, but I just kind of need to like get this model that doesn't know much about it to understand this data.
Yeah.
Um, those are like pretty reasonable. I've seen a decent number of people have success with those. Um, and then there's this like third category, which frankly is where I spend most of my time, which is like actually taking a really good model and trying to make it better at something. And that's really hard. Like to be clear, like there's a reason why um, the research labs are make good models and make better models than most other people's can, because like they hire pretty smart people to work on this task of like how do you take a model and do the last mile fine tuning to make it really good. It's like sufficiently hard that most people really should like not engage with it. I don't think like that extra juice is worth the squeeze for a lot of people.
Mm.
I think like the vast majority of use cases, like you could typically take a model and get good enough performance
Yeah.
off the shelf. But if you just like happen to be in the place where like you really care about the 5% past where a model can get right now, maybe that's like why you're competitively differentiated. Maybe it's like the difference between your product kind of working and not is that last 5%. Then I think it can make sense to do research, and that gets like pretty sophisticated. I think there's like all sorts of different fine-tuning methods that can work there, and you have to be like it's a research project very much at that point. It is not like an engineering project. It's like we need to do research to figure out what data methods and tooling are going to actually make a model better at a task. But it's certainly possible. Like, I mean, labs all the time make models better at specific tasks. You've seen it in a whole bunch of different ways as new models have come out over the last, like, in particular, 6 or 8 months. Um, so it's like obvious if you squint that labs have the capability to like take a model and make it better at a thing. And if that's true, then that should be true for anybody effectively, but the cost is really high. So like it just has to be like so worth it to go down this sort of research endeavor. But it does work. Like you can take an arbitrary problem and think about how do I make a model better at that problem.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned before also something that I wholeheartedly agree with on, since we're not super clear with what is happening when you send in the prompt and you don't know if the output is not good enough because my prompt is not good enough, or because I need to now make the actual model better, then a lot of folks potentially default to fine tuning as the next step, because it's just like, oh, well, I gotta make this output better. So I guess if I can't get there with my prompts that I bought from an AI influencer off of Twitter, then I think I should now start looking into fine tuning. And
Yeah.
that is hopefully what we are advising folks not to do. Uh,
Yeah. I think that's like exactly right. There's this like kind of mysterious promise of fine tuning that exists sometimes, I think, where it's like, if you put all of your data into the machine learning box, like surely it will get better. Um, and as someone who has like put a lot of data into the machine learning box and watched the models get worse more often than they get better for like the average set of data you get, I can tell you that's like a very expensive task to take
oh my God.
by
Yeah.
default. Like when I think it's not straightforward, it's not obvious. It's not obvious that any single set of data is going to make the model better at what you care about. Um, like that's why I describe some of this as like research to some extent, because like actually figuring out what's going to impact the behavior you care about just takes time. And it's not easy. And so I think like, yeah, there's something about like the pull of like the power of machine learning getting us there. It's gotten us a long ways. Uh, but I have certainly seen a lot more teams have a lot more success working on prompting longer than fine tuning, especially in like raw count.
I really want to talk to you about agents, because that is the buzzword of the year. And it feels like everyone is trying to do things around it. I have recorded a ton of episodes
I'm sure.
with folks that are putting agents into production. I feel
Yeah.
like you've probably seen some really cool use cases with agents. What are some, just off the top of your head, areas you want to jam on around agents?
Obviously, like we have seen the same thing, which is like, I think a lot of the people that we've seen have the most success with Claude have been building agents. Yeah, and we've put a lot of work into making models that are like better at doing agentic shaped things. We are like very much of the belief that that is what's to come. Um, like it's funny. I think you think about agents and there's part of the funny thing that I think has happened and part of the funny thing about working in this industry is it's kind of hard to know when and what model is going to come out that makes a specific agent work well. Uh,
Oh,
I don't think we internally at the labs like have a perfect grasp on some model we're forecasting for the future, like what it's going to be good enough to solve some agent task is going to be, right?
uh-huh.
So part of the funny thing is like you kind of just sit around knowing that there's something like you squint and something looks like it's going to work. And then maybe one of these models is like kind of good enough to hit the liftoff point where it's actually valuable. So to give you an example, like that clearly happened with coding last year, right?
Yeah.
I think like at the tail half of last year, and especially when we released the updated Sonnet 3.5 in October, like you saw a lot of the coding agents really, really explode. And I think that's because like it was the first time where a model really got like to that next tier of, oh, this is like went from like a cute thing that I'm like happy to play with to like, whoa, this is really, really good.
Yeah, if it's useful.
It's
This
useful.
saves me time. I
Yeah.
can describe things. That's when you saw the YouTube videos of like my 8-year-old daughter just built a
Yeah,
website.
exactly. Um, exactly. And that's the thing that I think is kind of interesting because like what that implies a little bit is like you just kind of have to like get a feel for what are we close to, like what could pop next a little bit, and kind of like maybe it's hard to know if it will, when it will, which release from which lab, like who knows what's going to make something really, really great. But I think you can like start to see different things take off. So coding is the one that like has obviously taken off. We released Claude Code
Yeah,
this week as
I
part of the
saw that.
release, and that's like a really awesome, I think, example of like I think part of what's cool about Claude Code is it's still like a fairly lightweight thing around the model, and it really highlights like how the model itself is getting better at being this thing. Um, so coding has quite clearly exploded, and I have like hunches about other things I think could, it's hard for me to say for sure what will for the same perspective that you have, but I think there's like um, some more sophisticated, like, for example, legal workflows, I could imagine getting a lot better over long horizons. Um, there's like stuff, and we have people that work at Anthropic who have worked on things like accounting workflows, not like a product we're working on to be clear, but like I'm like know people at Anthropic who have in the past worked on that kind of thing. I think there's like a lot of stuff that is probably further out, but like you could imagine a model that like gets good enough at using a spreadsheet that there's just like a ton of like manipulation of spreadsheets, which is just so much of like work that gets done is like menial moving things around spreadsheets and running formulas and stuff. That you can imagine like models getting better at that kind of thing and that like having a really big impact on what types of agents are like actually useful for doing work. If you can go to Claude.ai and say like, here's this spreadsheet and here's this analysis I need to run. Can you like go do it?
And create a
Um,
data visualization from it.
yeah, like build the analysis, build a model, like predict forecast this thing, tell me what the answer is, and like give me the sheet to show it.
I need a
Um,
dashboard for my boss,
sure,
like,
right?
in 20 minutes when my meeting is.
Yeah, yeah. um, but like, yeah, I think part of the frustrating thing on the flip side of this is like I even like I have about as much information as I could have, and it's like hard for me to predict what the next thing that's gonna work is. But if you had to guess me like what the pattern or ask me what the pattern is for like what's gonna happen with agents, it's that like it could happen because of this model we just put out this week. It's like hard to know to some extent. But like models are gonna come out. Some startup or someone is gonna be like building this agent in this category, and it's like, oh shit, it works now. Like it didn't work, and like it's like, oh, it's like good now, and then they're just gonna explode. Like it's gonna be over. It's gonna be a month, and they're gonna explode, and it's gonna be like all you hear about could took off, and
A la Cursor.
a la
Like
cursor,
100 million in whatever X amount of months, not years.
right? And that's like I think you're gonna see that pattern happen, um, with just like a handful of different products, workflows, and tools people have, where like around some model that gets like the key set of small capabilities you need to make it so that it went from like, oh, it looks like it's about to do this, but then it like tripped and stubbed its toe, and now I have to go figure out what went wrong. It like ruins the immersion of trying to use this agent, to like, oh, I asked it to write this code and it just did it, and I like didn't think about it. And that's like a world of difference. So
It's funny you mentioned that too, because the hackiness that you have to do when your agent doesn't work, you spend all this time trying
yeah.
to just get it there so you don't have that experience, or your end user doesn't have that experience of, oh, I thought it was going to work and then it didn't work. And so the reliability of the agents is
Well,
something that
that's
I
like
think,
so much of why it's like the tipping point. It's
yeah,
like as soon as you have to go in and figure out what didn't go wrong, well, like you waste all of it. Like you have to
exactly.
get the full context on why it went wrong and what happened in the middle. And it's like you are like nearly at the point where you may as well have done it yourself.
Mhm.
And even if it's like one little tiny mistake at the end that happens, right? But it happens like enough, then it's like, oh, I'm trying to have it do this thing, but I have to actually go like do the whole thing to figure out what went wrong. But as soon as it, like, crosses that threshold of, like, more often than not, you don't need to check it, like, it looks, then it's like, "Oh, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. It's incredible."
Yeah.
Which I think, like, again, I'm just gonna fall back on code because it's the thing we've seen so much, but it's like, I've had AI write code for me for a long time. Like, I've been in Anthropic for a year, like, I've used AI to write code a lot over the last year, obviously. Um But, like, there's this big difference from, like, I copy and paste it in, and I, like, poke through it, and I, like, kinda get it there, to, like, it just kinda happens. That
Yeah.
is, like, way different?
Mhm.
I wish I had, like, some hot, spicy prediction of, like, exactly what the next thing is that it's gonna take off. I really don't. But that's, like, the thing that I expect to be true for agents, is that, like, a model comes out, a month goes by, the thing clicks for someone, it explodes, and then like, bam, there's another industry that's like really got a new way of doing
Riding
work.
high. Yeah, it takes the menial work and all of these tasks, or whatever the people that are in that sector normally do. Now they're doing it a lot faster. And so they're able to produce a lot more from it. And I think it's exactly what you're saying. Like, it's just going to be more reliable. And you're going to see that reliability is going to then echo out
Yeah.
into the world.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I completely agree. I completely agree.
And it's funny you mentioned how the model updates will cause this type of second or third order effect, and also how folks almost need to reset when new models come out. Because I was talking to some friends who are building agents, and they said that every time they upgrade to a new model, it's almost like they have to start from scratch with the prompts
Yeah.
again, because a lot of what you're saying is the models are better at doing things. So now the prompts, you don't need to specify all these little
Yep.
edge cases. You don't need to tell it to do that thing anymore because it already does it. It's already in the training or the fine tuning.
Yeah, I mean, with Pokemon, to bring it back to that, like, every time I've tested on one of the new models, like, the most common change it makes is some, like, deleting stuff? It's like, "Oh, I had all of this, like, prompt stuff in there to, like, tell it to not make all of these stupid mistakes and to, like, try to put Band-Aids all over it." And then if I just delete all the Band-Aids, it's just way better. I think, like, part of why people have a hard time seeing new models come out sometimes, I think this is true for, like, almost every model that comes out, is like you look at these benchmarks, but they're not typically like the thing that's holding the model back is not like some
Some
specific, not
benchmark.
some big thing. It's not like you learned physics overnight and that's like how it like why it's been to be better at filling out a spreadsheet. It's like, oh, it like got just like good enough to click on a cell in this spreadsheet,
Yeah.
like it clicks on the right cell now, and then it all works, right? And it's like kind of imperceptible if you're just chatting with Claude.ai, that it's like this model
Yeah.
that could, for the most part, look like it's like just kind of sounds like maybe incrementally a little smarter or whatever, but like not much. But like if it got a little better at clicking on a spreadsheet, and that means that it can fill out spreadsheets now, it's like, oh, they'll be game over, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of like we're in this funny era where models come out, and I think to some, like at first glance for some people, it's like, what's the big deal? What's so much different? Kind of looks the same. Like on Claude.ai, it feels the same, right? And people notice a little, but it's not like this like gargantuan thing for everything until you find the thing that it's actually way better at. Like this, oh, this when I asked it for this thing, it's like
Yeah.
way better. And then
Yeah.
it's like, that's where you end up seeing a lot of the change from my perspective. And like, in Pokemon, that's what happened, right? Like, it's like it wasn't obvious. Some of these benchmarks look kind of similar, and then suddenly, like, we hook it up to Pokemon, and it's like, oh, it's like night and day. This model like can do it. It's like, whoa, that's crazy. That's so weird.
We gotta show more people.
Right?
We gotta release this to the world.
Yeah.
That's what we can expect as far as the next big breakthrough is agents on your video games. And so actually, one thing that it reminded me of there is it's like what was the quote from Neil Armstrong when he came off of the moon landing when he's
One
like,
small
"One
step for
small
man,
step."
one giant
Yeah.
leap for mankind.
It's
Yeah.
like one small thing for the model, but one giant leap
Yeah.
for mankind in a way.
Yeah.
Uh, makes me think about it. So, what other stuff have you been thinking about lately? I remember, and to let you know, whenever I chat with you, and I always love chatting with you, I come out of these conversations like, "Oh, damn, I wasn't viewing that way, but now you totally changed my mind." And point in fact, one of the first times that we talked after the whole AI revolution started and got underway, you were saying, "Dude, there's like millions of developers that can now use AI as opposed to the 1 million or hundreds of thousands
Yeah.
of machine learning engineers that use AI. Like, do you realize what is going to change now?" And I was
Yeah.
like, "Are you sure? I don't think so. It doesn't seem like it's that good." And after that conversation with you, I was like, "Oh, well, I guess maybe I'm going to be open-minded about it." So, are there other areas and I'm not saying that there's been such a big disruption recently, but things that you're thinking about now that you're excited about that don't involve Pokemon?
What do you mean? What else is there?
Exactly.
Um
That's that's probably been your life for the past, whatever,
At least the
12
last
months.
4 days, it's been a little bit of my life, but, I'm gonna give you, like, a series of boring answers because, like, I've just been so enveloped in trying to make better models and help people use them better. Um, and so, like, I honestly, like, feel a little blinders on, which is, like, all I can think about these days is, like, what's gonna happen with new language models and how are they gonna change how people use them. And so I'm kind of like still stuck on the same thought that I gave you when we talked a while ago, which is
Has it
like,
changed? Has that, like, assumption of, "Hey, now everyone is going to start using AI," you still feel strongly about that? Are you doubling down? Are you backing off? Like,
yeah, I mean, if you go talk to the world, like if you talk to the people that we talk to, like it is not it is not just ML people that we talk to build AI features, you know? It's not even close. Like the vast majority of the people that build with Claude are engineers. And then you talk about the people who are like actually getting value out of it. It's like people going to Claude.ai and doing all sorts of other stuff too,
yeah,
right? It's
yeah.
like, and you can build workflows on top of Claude. Like I saw you are interested in MCP. Like you can build like pretty significant workflows without really like um needing a huge engineering effort. Like you expose a few things via MCP and like you can start building out like workflows that really do a lot of your job for you just by like gluing some of the pieces together that have been exposed in your organization. And so yeah, much more radicalized than ever. That the part of what's happening here is that like we are dramatically raising the bar on who can use it. I think there's a long ways to go. Like I think the experience of go to a blank chatbot and like try to figure out how to use it is not good enough for some people, right? Um, and so I think like figuring out how to elevate people to feel like they understand like what can I do with this thing is an unsolved problem in general.
Yeah, I heard it put that this way that I really like is how much cognitive load are you putting on the end user?
Yeah,
And when it is a blank chatbot and they have to create the question or create the
yeah,
whole prompt, that's a lot of cognitive load as
it is.
opposed to scrolling TikTok, you
Yeah,
know? And so,
yeah, it is, and it just like I don't know. It's AI. You just like see a lot in the world, and I think it can be like somewhat overwhelming if it's not grounded in like what does it do for me.
yeah.
And I think people are slowly figuring that out. But maybe this just like ties back to like software engineers clearly figured out what AI can do for them. You know, I it's been a while since I've run into someone who has not, at least to some extent, figured out a way that using language models like has a pretty big impact on how they do their job.
Yeah, even just with the coding, that's true. I may be biased, obviously, but in my eyes, there's almost like the rabbit hole that every software engineer has to go down when they start trying to build AI features. And that is they start learning about AI more and more and more. And all next thing you know, it's like, okay, well, you're almost like this hybrid of someone who is a data engineer. Like they have to learn about pipelines. They have to learn about all this stuff that we've been
Yeah,
doing. It's almost like this gateway drug into the ML world or AI world, I guess is what they would call it.
it's funny. Like a lot of the core skill set that I think was relevant for machine learning people, once you can like give up control of the gradient descent, is actually still a pretty uh, relevant skill set. Like a lot of what you do to make these systems better is you like build the data sets you need to evaluate them. You do this like sort of like stochastic iteration process over prompts or whatever it is, or like the various systems that build out an agent or whatever it is. But there's like a lot of just like pure experimentation you need to do to like get it. And it needs to be good. Like you need to track your experiments. You need to be like thoughtful about what and how you did it. If you're imprecise with that, like you end up in the same holes that we've learned a lot about doing machine learning in the day. Um, and so, like, there's just all of these sort of like crossover skill sets that I think are true, where there's a lot that engineers building with language models can learn from the history of machine learning. And there's a lot of skills that people with machine learning backgrounds, I think, can use. Um, and I think like it's just a question of like figuring out where and how to like let go and live in that hybrid world. Like ideally, you don't need to worry about inference anymore, you know? Like,
Yeah.
you get
Fascinating.
it's like one of the coolest like, one of maybe the least talked about things I think about what labs do, but, like, they figure out how to serve machine learning models at, like, incredible efficiency to people. And in the past, it was like, "Oh, I'm gonna have to figure out, like, a GPU cluster and serving and routing and all" like, there's just, like, all of this annoying stuff you need to figure out to use ML that's just, like, a fancy API where you get to pay as you go on demand. Like, it's crazy how convenient that is to use machine learning.
Yeah.
And like how quickly people got hooked on the drug that is token-based pricing, where you just pay for API calls instead of having to pay to like host GPUs and deal with it. Like, so I guess like that I use that as an example of like, hopefully some of this has just like gotten much easier. Like you don't need to worry and think as much about GPUs if you're just like going down the managed route that I think most people should be on. There's like all of this infrastructure hassle that you can kind of not have to worry as much about. Like the data problems tend to be like a little less painful. It's not like cluster scale data a lot of the times that you're thinking about with language models. It tends to be like, small amounts of information about people maybe, but like it's not like a lot that you're really working with. Um, Compared to like, our background, we both have seen like really gnarly data problems.
Yeah.
Um, and in my time in Anthropic, I've seen nowhere near that kind of data problem, which is just like, it's just getting a little simpler. Um, so
Yeah, my one buddy told me and he works at a bank. So you can imagine the strictest of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
regulations. He was just like, for the new gen, because I was asking him, what are you doing? He's serving both Gen AI use cases and traditional ML use cases.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you can, all that fraud detection, fun
Yep,
stuff he's doing, and the Gen AI stuff.
totally.
He said, man, when you can get away with it, outsource everything to the, like, get rid of all the headache for the
Yeah,
platform and just outsource it to these labs.
I know. Um, yeah, I think that one, like, has just taken a little bit of convincing for people because I think it happened so fast where we like a lot of people invested so much in figuring out all of this really complicated infrastructure to be able to participate in machine learning. And I think like the idea of, oh, we can do it without all of that, like we can build on top of this like place that's going to like in some cases host training and inference and everything, and I just like submit data sets or submit inference calls and like it all happens and it auto scales and it's as big a scale as I want, like everything's perfect. um that's like a thing that I think it takes some adapting if you've like spent this muscle building out the infrastructure, but man, it's like way
Way
easier. The people
easier.
who let go and embrace the free infrastructure they're getting, to some extent the free for management they're getting, I think have like been able to make a ton of progress on this stuff.
Yeah, it's like the grandpas yelling at their kids. Back in my day, we had to actually hook up all this and figure out our own gradient descent.
I mean, this is what I said to you, though. This is, like, why I was so excited to join because I spent so much time helping people figure out how to hook up all of this stuff, and
Yeah.
it's so hard and challenging, and now I just, like,
Yeah,
easy
and
mode,
it's all custom,
You put
right?
some
And
words
it's
over here,
all,
and you get some words out the other side, and we all just have a good time now. It's great.
yeah. And then, yeah, exactly, we can play Pokemon, or at least watch some AI play Pokemon.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Exactly.